everyone, welcome to the second episode of season 2 of Secure Web Kratikal podcast. Today our hot topic of discussion is data protection as a business strategy, where we will be discussing the role of DPDP and ISO 27001 in it. In this topic, we will be highlighting the ever-evolving cybersecurity landscape, the compliance frameworks, the data privacy landscape, and specifically the security awareness around it. So, I, Sanjana Kumari, the Security Compliance Executive at Kratikal, is your host for today. And joining me today is Mr. Nikunj Rakesh, Lead of Risk and Compliance and CISO at Kratikal. Welcome, Nikunj.
Thanks for having me here, sir.
So, Nikunj, what I have seen so far, which has been also highlighted in a report published by IAPP, that 68% of consumers believe that their data is not being taken properly, and 29% of them are quite clear that the companies are not fairly collecting their data, like through a fair means. So based on these statistics, don't you think that the data protection should, being the need of time, be a part of the business strategy for the organization? What is your take on the same?
I concur with this perspective, Sanjana. So these days, data protection is no longer just a regulatory requirement in the market. So whenever an organization that is setting up a business strategy, so for example, if an organization that is dealing with customer PII, be it sensitive or normal PII, they should also consider including another set of objectives that are typically aligned with data privacy, because their core nature of business is processing PII. If obviously they are controlling or processing PII, they need to make sure that they have a set of objectives that are aligned with data privacy, as I mentioned. This would help these organizations achieve these goals in a very systematic and seamless manner, because when the things are coming from the top management, organizations and the employees generally try to abide by these particular requirements and make sure all the things are in place.
That's quite an interesting take, Nikunj. I believe many of the organizations as of date treat compliance around regulations like GDPR or CCPA as a checkbox, nothing more than that. They just want to acquire the compliance against the set frameworks or the regulations to acquire more clients. But they often fail to acknowledge the fact that it is also essential for their business as well, speaking of their internal security and privacy posture. So what you have in your mind around this specific concern?
Okay. So, Sanjana, to answer this question, this is a very good question, in fact. So, check boxes, yes, the industry treats the controls or the requirements of the standards or regulations as checkbox requirement simply. I believe this is not a right practice, because when we are just following this practice, so for example, let's say an organization that is going for a certification of ISO 27701, what they'll do is, if let's say it's their first time certification, what they'll do is they'll just make some policies around the standards and the requirements. Obviously they'll as per the checklist what they have for 27701, they'll make sure what all evidence are required that the auditor would check. They would work specifically on those evidence, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a one-time activity that they perform. ISO being a standard that follows the PDCA approach, Plan, Do, Check, Act, wherein Act stands for continual improvement of the standard. This shows an organization should set up processes, right? Integrate privacy and security into the existing processes to make sure that these things are not special for them, right? Mm-hmm. So these things should be aligned with the normal processes in the organization, where organizations are putting in effort just to create or generate an evidence and then present it in front of the auditor to get a compliance report. This is not an effective way. If the organization from the day one is working on setting up the pure process, obviously integrating privacy into their processes, and then moving on with the audit, they will not have to fetch these evidence the next year for the next year audit, because when they are working and creating new processes or modifying the existing processes from the privacy point of view, they would automatically be generating evidence throughout the timeline. So when the next year comes up for the audit, auditor would come up and they would just fetch an evidence. They would not have to work on the evidence again. So this becomes a process. This is why this is not an effective approach of just working on a checklist or check boxes, like when you strike off check boxes. This is not a complete thing for a typical compliance framework, privacy framework, or any information security framework. This is what I believe.
That's actually quite fair. Like many organizations just target for the first year when they are appearing for the external audit, but they do miss out on the fact that they have to appear for a surveillance audit for the next year. And for that also, the audit being quite rigorous than the previous one, they need to produce even more samples for the evidence for the same. One more thing which I recall, that why organizations often fail to keep up with the compliance specific to the privacy framework is because they don't have a properly defined governance posture across their organizations, or the ethical responsibilities of the personnel are not defined properly. The top management should set a verbose like such that the privacy framework should, to a certain extent, act quite independent to the security posture of the organization. Basically, the two teams should be quite separate from one another. There should be a separate DPIA, there should be a separate CISO, so that the security or the privacy objectives that are planned for the year can be achieved within the defined timeline. That's the major challenge, right? That one person is juggling across several responsibilities. How that person will be able to catch up with all the bandwagon they have to deal with? Because they have a limited amount of time, they have to report to several regulatory bodies. If the organization falls under certain regulations, they have to comply with those as well. So,
right, as you rightly mentioned, Sanjana, when it comes to reporting, this is a very big, this is a very big area where information security and data privacy, they get separated. Under data privacy laws, you need to report to the data protection board, right? If you talk about DPDP specifically, if there is a data breach under 72 hours, you need to report it to data protection board. That is a body set up by Government of India, right? And when you talk about a security breach, and there is one more thing, a security breach and a privacy breach, these are two different things.
True.
A security breach, so a privacy breach not necessarily can be a security breach. Let's say in an organization, I am a person, I am sending some PII details. I have sent this PII internally to another employee, but technically, if you see from security point of view, it is not a security breach because it is still internal. But from privacy point of view, it is a breach because that PII should not be with that person. Even if it is he is inside the organization, that would be a privacy breach in that case.
True.
This is how it is different from a security breach. And in security breach, obviously, we need to report to certain. So I mean, from the reporting aspects, is obviously there is a segmentation in these two aspects.
Besides the juggling of responsibilities, other major challenge which is very prominent in the industry is that people want certification or compliance with a quick serve approach. They want to be compliant within 2 weeks. They want to be compliant with ISO 27001 or be it ISO 27701, which is a PIMS standard, within a month, where they don't have anything with respect to security or privacy pre-existing in their organization, and they want to build up that entire posture within a span of a month or a week. How is that possible? I mean, I am not very sure from where does this unexpected expectations stem from, but somehow this shift in the market has led to several organizations just ticking off certain boxes which can just make the organization compliant with the set requirement or the regulation. But don't you think this approach is not a right thing to go with, specifically from a long-term perspective? Like, what can be the shortcomings an organization like such can face?
Again, Sanjana, it's a very good question. As I also answered this previous question of yours, that was around ticking check boxes. So this is one and the same thing. Basically, a lot of customers these days, as I mentioned, the primary business goal of these customers or these people who are running these organizations, the primary business goal is to run their business. This business could be into any industry, but not information security or data privacy. So these people or the board of directors of these organizations, obviously, we also should not expect that these people should be having knowledge around information security or data privacy. It's our task. People like us who are into these domains, information security and data privacy, should make these people aware, more and more aware, as advisors, why is it important, and what are the requirements of all these things, right? Because for them, it could be just a certificate. But for us, the people like us, we understand it's not a certificate. It's whole new activity, and it's a very big activity where you understand the context of the organization, starting from understanding the context of the organization, creating a scope for the organization, and then working on the scope that you have, the boundary that you have created, right? And when you're working for this boundary, you need to make sure that you are involving all the existing processes of the organization. You are assessing each and every asset of the organization to make sure this is in place, right? But if you talk about, so in the market, there are certain certification bodies right now that are giving these fast certifications. But I believe these certifications do not hold any value, because I'll just give you an example with this. When you go to a university, when you pass the university, you get a degree, and with the degree you also get mark sheets.
True.
So the mark sheet is something that tells you what is your score, but the degree is something that certifies, okay, this person is holding a degree of this particular course, right? But if you go into the mark sheet level, this mark sheet level has the details around what are the marks that this person has scored. So when you go to the audit reports, generally, there are certificates, ISO certificates, and then there are ISO audit reports. And if you talk about SOC 2, they are generally reports. These are not certificates. But people generally these days have this misconception that SOC 2 are certificates majorly, but these are not certificates. And these reports consist of all the findings, all the observations that the auditors find out generally. And as I mentioned, there are multiple certification bodies these days that just check mark the ticks against the evidence. For example, information security policy is required. They won't even check information security policy, what is written inside it. So most of the organizations these days, just for the sake of completing the compliance, they are just downloading policies, the templates that are available on the internet. They are using ChatGPT to create policies. So ChatGPT would not be able to help you, or internet won't be able to help you, because this is your organization. You know how it works. What kind of things should be there, it's your decision. So ultimately, ISO or any other InfoSec standard, it will give you guidelines how to implement things, but ultimately it's your call how you implement those things, right? Coming to another part of it, if you talk about, as I was mentioning, there are in this market, this is a very common practice that a lot of organizations are procuring these certificates with minimal effort, without even so these auditors are not even auditing these organizations. So this is a concern to the code of ethics from the auditor point of view. Being an auditor, you should follow the code of ethics. How you're auditing an organization, you should not be biased while auditing this organization. You should actually find out the evidence, the source of the evidence. You should make sure that you maintain the accuracy and completeness of the evidence that you're collecting as an auditor, and you're testing this evidence, right? So this can be used afterwards. Obviously, the customers, the bodies, the third parties can obviously review these reports to understand what is the security posture right now, right? Now, this is a suggestion to the organizations who have their information security or privacy management system set up in the organizations. When you perform the vendor due diligence for your vendors, you generally ask for ISO certificates or SOC 2 reports, right? When you are asking for ISO certificates, as I told you earlier also, a lot of organizations these days have ISO certificates with minimal effort, without even working on that, without even understanding what is ISMS, right? So, as a supplementary thing with the certificate, being the person who is responsible to assess the vendors of the organization, you should also ask the audit reports. You should also conduct on-spot random evidence collection from that vendor, so that you know it is actually in place right now. This would reduce the quality of the security throughout the market, because me being a person, I'm not just checking if a degree is there or not. I'm actually checking the marks. If this person has scored good in the exam or not. I would see access control, how strong is it? I would see login monitoring, how strong is it? I would go domain with domain, right? When I see everything is on point, I would then approve the vendor to work with my organization. But if I'm just checking the certificate these days, everyone has a certificate. So it's a suggestion to improve this in the industry. We need to make sure, as the people who are assessing the vendors, we actually get into their systems and understand how they are working and how they are collecting evidence, so that it gives us a surety that tomorrow these people are taking security seriously or privacy seriously, and they would be processing our data in a secure manner.
That couldn't be more true. Actually, the thing is, what many organizations or the top management of those organizations often miss out is that they fail to acknowledge the fact that from the countries they are collecting the data, specifically if those countries are from the Southern Arabia region or maybe European region, where there are stricter guidelines to processing PII data or maybe even the confidential data. The government has declared a directive of how you should be dealing with those sets of information. So that risk adherence aspect has been set by their government, but to ensure that thing with, like, your organization is supposed to be compliant with the same, you need to take that responsibility. You need to be aware of the consequences that if you fail, you will be subjected to something which would be on a national level, where you would be answerable to the government, or the regulatory body which would be answerable to the government.
Exactly. So, to add on to this, Sanjana, there is one more thing, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast also, that governance is very important. So, for an information security or a privacy manager, the most efficient privacy manager or an information security manager would be a person who sets up a good level of governance in the organization. So, it's a whole sole responsibility of the manager who is going to the senior management who doesn't know anything about security or privacy. This person would be telling board of directors or the senior management what is privacy and what are the consequences, as you rightly mentioned. We need to tell them, if you don't do this, these are the consequences. This amount you will have to pay as a fine to the regulatory bodies or to XYZ people, right? If this gets breached. So this is a very right approach, going to your senior management telling, okay, these are the consequences that we can face if we do not follow or implement these things. So it's your call. Ultimately, it's the business call, what you have to do, what the business has to do. But obviously, as I mentioned, this is a responsibility of information security managers or privacy managers. But I would also, you can say, request all the people who are part of the board of directors of different organizations or senior management. They should also understand why is it important, and they should also pay some, give some time to their security or privacy managers to understand their requirements. Why is it required? So this goes, as I mentioned, if it is coming from the top, the organization eventually will implement it in a very seamless manner.
True. And by doing that, the organization can eventually prevent the hefty fines they are supposed to pay in case of non-compliance to the said regulation or the framework. So as we discussing about the fines, what I think that what organizations can do on their part, because the fines can get as hefty as possible, where you might need to give 4% of your annual turnover, or like $250 million or euros, depending upon which of the term of the fine would be higher. So to prevent that, again, coming back to my question, the organization should do a rigorous DPIA in their organization and define a proper records of processing activities. But again, there are a lot of buts and ifs around it. Can you address this to our viewers, what exactly the organization should account for properly with respect to DPIA or ROPA, so that they can be on the safer end and not be liable to the fines, specifically the regulatory fines, because nobody wants to be levied with fines, to be very fair.
Correct. Okay. So if you talk about the organizations generally, if you talk about enterprise level organizations, they have a set of business processes. If you talk about small scale organizations, they also, and in terms of small scale organizations, business changes very frequently. It is like very frequently how the business changes are. So let's say a new process is being added to the existing processes, an old process is being taken out from the existing process. So in terms of small level businesses, the changes are very frequent. This obviously gives a risk where you can, let's say, stay non-compliant for the most of the time, because let's say you conducted a DPIA right now, and some of your business aspects, some of your data collection points changed after that, and you have not conducted a DPIA after that. Obviously, that is a risk, and this risk stays in your system until you conduct the DPIA the next time, right? So to address this, organizations should set a schedule on the basis of their frequency of the change, right? So why I'm specifying on frequency of change, because so this is where change management comes into picture. Why assessing a change before it is implemented into an organization is very important. because obviously it will give you an insight about what impact it would put on the organization if this change happens, and what are the positive and negative impacts of it. Obviously, you assess them, and from privacy point of view, you conduct a DPIA, Data Protection Impact Assessment. It is you can refer to a DPIA as a risk assessment for the data privacy part. So in a typical DPIA, what you do is you obviously sit with the different data owners or business owners. Obviously, you specifically take details about the business operations that are customer facing, and they are directly obviously collecting DPIA. So you sit with the business owners and discuss, okay, from where you are collecting the data, how you are collecting the data, what type of data is being collected to process. Another thing is data minimization. If let's say you are processing PIA, you have a SaaS product that is hosted on a cloud, and you are providing this SaaS product to your customers. Let's say this SaaS product is meant to be processing only the names and emails of the employees. In case your business team is additionally taking phone numbers to be ingested in the tool, that basically exploits the requirement of data minimization. So data minimization says if you require 2 data fields, do not take anything else other than that, because if you are doing that, it would obviously give you or increase the exposure of the risk, because if you are just holding name and email in this case, this is required for the processing of this activity, but phone number is not required. So there is no need of taking a phone number. If tomorrow you upgrade your process, as I mentioned, business change. If let's say tomorrow your process changes, you add on another module in the product where you are collecting the phone number also, then you can take the phone number, right? And obviously, while conducting a DPIA, you also focus on records of processing activities, or ROPA. We, in a short term, we call it ROPA, or records of processing activities. This is nothing but a list of all the activities that an organization, that let's say a controller or a processor is performing on PII. Let's say there is a point where, for example, if you talk about a SaaS product again, in a SaaS product, there might be third-party providers who are processing the same PII of our customers, right? In this case, in a typical ROPA, what you would do is you would obviously understand what are the basic set of PII that you require for operation of this process, right? That is the bare minimum. You will mention it in the ROPA. Why is it required? You will obviously provide a proper justification. This is the type of data, this is the data set that we require, and it is required over here for this type of processing. Then let's say there is a third party who processes your customer data on your behalf for a typical or a certain activity. In ROPA, you will add on that this is a third party. They are responsible for processing the PII for this particular purpose. So to tell the purpose is utmost important in data privacy. You need to be transparent enough that if let's say tomorrow data subjects come up to you asking why are you collecting this data, you should be transparent enough by showcasing them, yes, this is the data that we are collecting from you, and for this purpose we are collecting this data from you. And obviously, as per the other data privacy regulations, when this data is no more required, you need to purge this data from your system. This is the best practice you should follow. Obviously, if you're not doing this, you're not conducting regular DPIAs. As I mentioned, let's say if you have a policy of conducting a DPIA once a year, but you are making frequent changes in a year, in a single year. As I mentioned, small organizations change very frequently. So just one DPIA would not suffice the requirement or would not address all the risks related to data privacy. So I would suggest you should rather link it to the change management process. When a major change comes up, when you think major change from privacy point of view is coming up, if additional data field is being added or being collected, or let's say some existing PII is being assessed in another part, you need to obviously make sure that you conduct a DPIA and then update the results accordingly and communicate the same with the board. It is very important. Communication with the board is very important everywhere, and obviously, ideally, the DPO should beat DPO or beat CISO. So these roles are typical advisory roles in an organization. In a typical organization, these people are the subject matter experts of what they are dealing with. So these people also have to aware the different team leads or different departmental heads, as in how to assess the data. So obviously, if you ask me, let's say if I'm a CISO, I'm serving as a CISO for Kratikal right now. If someone from another department comes to me, says, "Is this data confidential or not?" The first thing that I would do is see the ownership of this data. If this lies with my department, that is risk and compliance, I would be the right person to say if it is confidential or non-confidential. But if this data lies with the marketing department or HR department, I am not the right person to tell that. I am only an advisor in that case. I can go to the HR manager, say, okay, this type of data should be confidential for you. This type of data, if it gets breached, if it puts an impact on the organization, this is a confidential data. We give the knowledge or share the knowledge with the different stakeholders, and these stakeholders should be responsible enough to make sure that they are segregating the data and discovering the data that is sensitive. Let's say if you are processing sensitive PIA, then obviously a lot more things come up into picture, right? But if you only just talk about PIA, that also has a lot of obligations. So you need to make sure on-point DPIA should be conducted, wherein you are assessing all the factors, how the PIA is being collected and how is it being processed, and what all findings that have come up from DPIA, they should be resolved in a timely manner. And obviously, maintaining a ROPA is very important for you to give the transparency to all your customers and all the interested parties that would be conducting business with you.
Couldn't be more fair. What I believe that since DPDP is on the verge and it would be in action any moment once the board is established, but the actual problem with the organization, specifically in India, is that people lack the understanding of how to classify a PII data. I have heard many people referring to the business emails as non-PII, which is not definitely the right thing to do, because the business email does has the full name of the person if it has been separated by a comma or a full stop. So can you help our viewers understand what exactly qualifies as a PII, specifically with perspective to DPDP-A, which they have to account for like doing the DPIA or ROPA?
So yes, this is a very big confusion amongst a lot of people these days, what to consider as a PII. PII can be anything that directs you directly to an individual. A name would always direct to an individual. You take my name, obviously my email would be from that name, right? nikunj.rakesh@kratikal.com is my email, right? If you see, that email has my name in it, right? So ultimately it is becoming a PII. Anyone who reads my name, reads that email, is reading my name, right? Ultimately that maps back to me directly, without any supporting evidence, without any supporting supplementary material. So for example, there are some types of PIIs that are indirect PIIs. In those cases, for example, address. A single address can, let's say there is a house that has, let's say there are 4 people who are living in the same house, right? This address is single, but there are 4 people living in there, right? If you just take out the address, you would not be able to find out the exact person in that place, whom you are, pointing out to. But when you write down, let's say, a PAN number plus the address, that becomes a PII. That becomes a direct PII. You can correlate this PAN number. It has the same address. It has this name. This PAN number is registered to this user. Then you obviously move to the particular data subject in that case. So here, one more thing as a good practice, what organizations can practice is, obviously organizations who are dealing with sensitive PII and obviously who are falling into significant data fiduciaries. These organizations should follow a practice where they are not making the email IDs as per the names of the employees. They should rather use codes. They can use their own nomenclature to create an email ID. They should have their own nomenclature, for example, XYZ. Whatever nomenclature you decide for creating an email ID, it should be a systematic way. If someone new is joining, you would give this number or this code to that person and you map it at the back end. So when this email is going out somewhere, if this email, even if it is being exposed to the public, no one would be able to understand whose email is this, right? Because that email, individually, that email does not have that name. It has the nomenclature that this organization uses at the back end, and only they know how to map this with the user. So this is how you can protect. Obviously, this takes us to anonymization and pseudonymization, right? This is why it is important. We need to make sure that we are not exposing the PII all the time. To secure the PII, for normal people, PII, name, name, phone numbers, these are very basic things. They don't consider it as a very sensitive data. But from data point of view, they are very important because there is a value associated to this data. When this data is fetched in bulk from, let's say, dark web or different markets, this is being sold in the dark markets at a very high price.
And that for identity theft.
Correct, exactly.
However, there also comes a second question correlated to this scenario is that, okay, we have classified what data is PII, what is a direct identifier and what is an indirect identifier. Now, when the responsibilities are split between a data controller or a data processor, what is the liability a controller has to bear when it comes to bearing the consequences, and what liability a processor has to bear when it comes to bearing the consequences? Though like on the writing we do know that it is clearly defined in the master service level agreement or the scope of arrangement between both the parties. But I believe the liability is a very controversial part which hardly gets addressed, specifically when a privacy breach has taken place. So can you throw some light on that as well?
Yes. Well, I'll give this with an example, a real life example. Let's say there's an organization A that is going to buy a SaaS product that would be processing their PII. It can be HRMS tool, it can be any tool that they would be using, right? So let's say this organization A onboards HRMS tool.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, organization A would be the data controller or the data fiduciary, because they are deciding where the how and where the data would be processed. Obviously, the employees of this organizations whose data would be ingested by this tool would be the data subjects, because their individual PII is being ingested in the system, and the organization from which they are purchasing this tool would be the data processor, because they are the ones who are working on the infrastructure of their end, right? If you talk about obligations, this is obviously this is something that is required, and we need to put some light on this. In terms of obligations, data fiduciaries are much more into that side where they are obligated with a multiple set of things, right? If you talk about a data processor's responsibility majorly revolves around supporting the data fiduciary in terms of compliance, in terms of all the activities that they need to perform, right? But a data fiduciary or a data controller would set up the requirements, how the data would be processed, how it would be taken, and for how long it would be stored. These are the things, or these are the rules that data fiduciary sets, because it's their employees at the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the processor would have no right to object or take any let's say any decision from the perspective of data standpoint, because they are not the data owners. Data owners would be the ones who are giving their data for processing to these data processors, right? And one more thing is that the data fiduciaries or data controllers, they generally obviously have to take the consent of the individuals. So the major responsibility of taking the consent lies with data fiduciaries. Obviously, data processors have to verify the consent from the data fiduciaries. This can be done in the case of, let's say, a typical SaaS offering. This can be done on a contractual basis. Whenever a contract is being signed within the data processor and the data fiduciary, obviously, the data fiduciary could mention that the consent from the data subjects or their employees have been taken for these particular activities, right? So it's a contractual consent that this organization is taking, and the processor is also acknowledging this that the consent has been taken. Obviously, managing the consent, keeping the consent, this is all required by the data fiduciary. And when you come to reporting, from the data processor point of view, if let's say you're a data processor, if you let's say notice a breach, if you see something that is not right from data privacy point of view, you report it to the data fiduciary as soon as possible, because ultimately they are the owners, right? You tell them whatever has happened and help or assist them to remediate if something is bad, if something has gone bad. You should be the number one, the data processors would be the number ones who would be assisting data fiduciaries to remediate this particular thing. And full assistance obviously should be given to the data fiduciaries over here. And if you come to the reporting side of the data fiduciaries, if there is a breach, obviously if let's say a data processor reports to a data fiduciary that there was a breach in our system, and this can be the set of data that is compromised on the dark web or anywhere, right? In this case, data fiduciary then, by acknowledging this, would straight away report it to the data protection board, stating that this set of data was breached on this date, and obviously given the initial assessment, what was the initial assessment from that point of view, and obviously giving all the insights to the data protection board is very much required under this.
So, as we wrap up, can you tell our viewers with respect to data security awareness, unlike the regular security awareness which you do in ISO 27001, what should the organization should cover with respect to their privacy information management system, like with respect to the do's and don'ts which the employee should be wary of?
Okay, so as far as the information security or privacy awareness trainings are concerned, the first thing there are a number of standards and frameworks in the market that talk about information security and data privacy, right? But there is one common thing in all of these standards and frameworks, that is awareness training. So why making people aware about these standards or these practices is important, because I'll just take an example of ISO 27701, right? It's a management system. When you're setting a management system, you expect inputs coming from multiple sources within an organization, right? So obviously in a management system, you divide the operations and the support departments, obviously, and on the basis of which you divide the roles and responsibilities of these departments and the different stakeholders that are there, right? But if you specifically talk about the awareness training part, you need to make sure that when you are giving this training, you are covering the first thing. What you need to cover is the basics. Basics are very important, because you cannot expect the people who are working in the organization, everyone knows about information security, or even they are tech savvy. People don't even know about IT, right? And we should not even expect the people know what IT is, because that is not their domain, that is not their core. If we are working there, we are working in that particular phase, that particular area where we are working for IT security or data privacy, right? So we are the ones who would make them understand why is it required. So if you talk about the basics can include, as I mentioned, what is a PIA? What type of information is a PIA? What type of information stands as sensitive PIA? Any health information, financial records, they stand for obviously sensitive PII that can impact an individual in a specific manner, right? So one thing is basics. The other thing is you understand what are their roles in the organization. You create a segregation amongst roles. For example, there would be a person who would be, let's say, working on a particular task. There would be another person who would be validating that task, right? There would be another person who would be sending out the report of the validated task to a third party. So these people have different R&Rs, different roles and responsibilities. And you need to make sure that when you're giving the training to these employees, these training are specific to their roles and responsibilities, and ensure that the privacy aspect, the data protection aspect, so for the training part, one more thing that is very important from awareness perspective is that whenever you're setting up a awareness training campaign in an organization, the first thing as a CISO or a data privacy manager, what you see is the culture of the organization. It is very important because let's say there are two different organizations. There are two different types of organizations, and these two different types of organizations have different cultures because the employees working in these organizations are from different locations, right? One organization, let's say this organization has a culture that is more inclined towards security. They understand what security is. They all are tech savvy. These people are working in a domain that is a tech savvy domain. They know what is IT. They know what is cloud. When they know cloud and IT, they automatically would get the understanding why the security is required. So there the culture is already aligned. But when you come to another organization that is, let's say, non-IT, and they don't have any knowledge about what IT is, what cloud is. They're just working on their specific systems, right? In this case, the culture, we cannot expect, because the culture is that way, we cannot expect the people would understand in an easier manner. So in that case, we need to tailor the trainings specifically for these particular users, right? We need to make them understand first what IT is, where you are working. This is a confidential thing. This is a critical thing for us, for you as well. So culture plays a very important role. How you set up the culture in an organization, that's what matters, because if the culture is not accepting the changes, obviously they would just take security as a, you can say a hurdle. They would not see security as a protective measure. They would see security as a hurdle. I want to complete that task, but I cannot do that because I need an approval from the CISO. This should not be taken as a hurdle. This should be taken more as, let's say, if I am completing a task, I should not think that I need to take the approval from CISO if he would give or not. I would rather think, let's go to the CISO, see, these are my inputs, let's ask from him, is this right from security and privacy point of view, if it is right, then we are good to go. So this is how we should change the culture or make the culture of an organization that supports information security or privacy awareness training amongst the employees. And again, things always come back to round zero. That is, if the things are coming from the board, if the board directly is directing everyone to do something, that will be done within no time, without any excuses and without any problems.
That's quite an interesting take, Nikunj. So I would like to conclude our session for today and would like to thank you for providing such an insightful thought on this topic, because this is something which many of the organizations are willing to hear, but there is no one to address the same. So I would like to thank my viewers as well for staying tuned with us. And do remember that privacy isn't just about a framework, but it is about building trust and securing your business. So for new sessions and new topics which you want to listen from us, stay tuned and do subscribe to our YouTube channel.